Hi, I'm Gareth Kane, and welcome to the Net Zero Business Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Lauren Juliff, Head of Investor Relations and Sustainability at the Clean Growth Fund. So, welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Hi, Gareth.
So, we ask all our guests this question just to give us all some background, get to know you a bit. How did you first get started in the world of sustainability?
Okay, so I've worked in asset management for 25 years this year. I started out at Fidelity in 2001 and spent 9 years at Schroders until I left and then joined a specialist Norwegian boutique active management company called Skagen Funds in 2013. But my undergrad was in maths, and so I went out seeking a career in finance in the early 2000s, really without much consideration of sustainability, really. There wasn't much talk of ESG back then, but I've always been focused on institutional markets, so mainly working with pension funds, DB, DC, and LGPS, who are long-term investors. And so sorry,
Can you spell those
LGPS.
bits out for our audience?
Yes,
I'm lost.
yeah.
The
So
acronyms, oh, yeah, we have a
DB.
rule that we spell out acronyms.
No, fair enough.
Uh,
DB, defined benefit pensions, DC, defined contribution pensions, which most people these days will have, and the LGPS is the local government pension scheme. So that is, well, that's quite a topical area, which we'll maybe get onto later about how the Chancellor has asked the local government pension scheme to pool and start channeling capital into sort of private markets. Yeah, so they're the local government schemes, council funds that are consolidated around the country for investment.
Fantastic. But how did that develop into a sustainability role then?
Yeah, so working with pension funds,
Mhm.
the concept of fiduciary duty was always a real strong consideration. So it's this idea that pension fund governors really need to consider how they can deliver the best possible risk-adjusted returns over the long term to pay pensions. So that's where, for me, climate change really became a serious topic for investors, and particularly after the publication of the IPCC 1.5 degree report in 2018. So at that time, I was working for a Norwegian asset management company called Storebrand, who'd recently bought Skagen Funds. And I met a portfolio manager there at Storebrand called Henrik Wold Nilsen with a PhD in physics and this deep interest in knowledge and climate change. And his thinking on climate risk was just way ahead of what else I was hearing in the industry. And he'd launched this global equity fund shortly after the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015 to address climate risk as a financially material consideration. So I just hit it off with him straight away. I was already reading a lot about climate risk. I loved the first Project Drawdown book. I don't know if you know that. It was published in 2017. And it took this real sort of scientific and practical approach to climate solutions. They map out and model the top 100 solutions to reach drawdown. So that's the point at which we pass the peak of atmospheric GHG emissions and they begin to decline. And I used to carry this book around with me everywhere. It's absolutely dog-eared now and covered in notes. But I also then, at that point, I just felt like the IPCC 1.5 degree report was a huge wake-up call for investors and for all industries, really. But at that time, there was a lot of talk about corporate sustainability, and I was quite skeptical about some of what I was hearing. So, long story short, I then decided to go back to university in 2019, just
Mhm.
before I turned 40, and do a master's in climate change and climate science. And I really wanted to understand the pathways and the projections in the IPCC report. Um, and so I was particularly concerned actually with the amount of CCS, so carbon capture and storage, that was being used in those pathways
Yeah.
to kind of offset this continued use of fossil fuels.
Mhm.
So I studied that part-time while I was working full-time, which was tough, but it was also so relevant and interlinked then with my work that I just found loads of ways of integrating the two. And so I wrote my thesis on the management of climate-related investment risk in the LGPS, which I've mentioned earlier. And then Henrik and I started writing these white papers together on the use of climate data in portfolio construction, which just generated a lot of interest.
Wow.
So I spoke a lot of industry events on the topic and responded to policy consultations on climate data and climate risk for investors, and particularly the unintended consequences of focusing really narrowly on corporate emissions data to understand and manage climate risks and opportunities.
Yeah. And we will come on and expand on that, I think, in a second.
Cool.
Um, so just because it's an issue I'm interested in, is what conclusion did you draw about the role of CCS? Is it going to save us, or the white elephant, or some point in between?
Yeah, I mean, this was my real concern at the time, which was it was kind of distracting from the need to really start focusing on how we do stop, is it how we draw down emissions? And it was sort of it was kind of kicking the problem into the future,
Yeah.
making it the future generation's problem. We then started, I think, as an industry, so we were talking a lot about corporate emissions reporting and net zero targets. And I think those things were only ever going to get us so far.
Hmm.
You know, even after, a few years now of the industry moving forward in talking about climate risk, I think I just started to feel quite frustrated about the lack of sort of impact and genuine action. Because
Yeah.
I just think that that transition to a clean economy, it's not going to happen by reducing portfolio intensity 7% a year in line with these, they're called Paris-aligned indices. They came out of this EU defined methodology, which was actually designed on the IPCC 1.5-degree report. That's where the 7% a year reduction came from.
Yeah.
But what it led to then was a lot of sort of shifting around listed exposures from equities like companies in BP and Shell into Microsoft and Apple. And
Yeah.
I just didn't see that as the real sort of transition. The transition requires productive capital flowing into innovation and growing new companies, industries, and good quality jobs. So I think that individual corporate science-based transition targets really do matter,
Yeah.
but not so that we can kind of add them all up and measure them across portfolios of hundreds of listed companies. I think the thing about corporate science-based targets is that they really inform that journey to net zero. But the real issue is that they show us exactly where these value chain pinch points exist.
Hmm.
Net zero is not going to become a reality if we don't invest in the startup technologies with private capital in those value chains so that these big companies can meet their science-based targets. And net zero is not purely an energy problem. It needs clean tech solutions across all sectors, from transport to buildings, food and agriculture, industry, water, power. And that's then what led me to the Clean Growth Fund.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask, is
Oh, great.
your emphasis on innovation and new technologies and new ways of working, I suppose, fits with the Clean Growth Fund. But perhaps you could introduce the fund to us, and what its purpose is and how it works.
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, the Clean Growth Fund, we are a specialist UK venture capital fund. We were established in 2020 by our founder, Beverly Gower Jones, to address the funding gap that faces early stage climate technology businesses.
Hmm.
So Beverly's had this long career in technology commercialization with a background in mining and geology. She co-founded Shell Technology Ventures, and she has an OBE for services to net zero innovation. And she identified that the biggest challenge facing the growth of the UK net zero economy was that these innovators just couldn't access the funding they needed to build the pilot plants and scale and commercialize their technologies. And she saw this as a huge opportunity to generate, as she describes it, a return on capital and a return on carbon. So it's kind of a dual goal. So our first fund raised 101 million from institutional asset owners in the UK. It invests across 19 companies in a broad range of sectors. So not just energy and power, but transport, food and agriculture, industry, buildings, circular economy, all of those things that I mentioned. But the red thread that runs through all our investments is that the companies must be able to demonstrate that when they're commercialized, when their technologies are commercialized, they've got the potential to abate at least 100,000 tons of carbon a year.
Right.
Yeah, so that could be kind of in any industry. And then we're quite hands-on investors. So our investors, they'll take a board seat and they'll work closely with the founders to help them scale and commercialize, because at that seed and Series A level, so very early stage companies, these clean tech innovators that are often coming out of universities, that they need capital, but they also need expert guidance on how to commercialize those technologies. And that differs quite a bit, I think, from what's called SaaS, so software as a service, or broader kind of private equity fund management. Successful clean tech VC is a real hands-on active undertaking. So our investment team has specialist knowledge and experience of commercializing decarbonization technologies, including like hardware development, so that we can actually deliver value generating support on growing businesses and teams opening production facilities and scaling technologies to cost benefit, or at least cost parity with incumbent tech, because that's the key, right? It's the
Yeah.
cost. These clean technologies, once they're scaled up, they can often deliver cost and efficiency benefits to traditional parts of the corporate value chain, and that's ultimately what will make them successful.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite example, favorite case study
Is that like picking a favorite child? I don't know if
yeah.
I'd like to have a favorite example. Yeah. No, I could definitely give you a case study. Let me talk about one that grabbed me when I first joined Clean Growth Fund from the first fund. Although I should mention actually our second fund, which we're raising for at the moment. We've just made our first two investments and announced those, which are really exciting technologies in sort of battery innovation and also food tech as well. But the one that I'm going to talk to you about now fits into this kind of science-based target story that I've been telling. So if you think about Tesco, for example, so Tesco, one of the UK's biggest companies. So because it's a constituent in the FTSE 100 and the MSCI World indices, institutional investors all over the world hold Tesco. They've got a science-based target, SBTI validated commitment to reach net zero GHG emissions by 2050. But a key barrier for Tesco was transport refrigeration. So if you think about what Tesco has to do with their transport, they have to get their produce all around the country at different temperatures, multiple temperature zones. And that requirement has previously been manageable for them with diesel engines. And they were reliable, but then incompatible with this sustainability objective. In 2020, there's a company called SunSwap that was founded by experts with backgrounds in refrigeration, automotive engineering, and clean tech. So together to develop this innovative solution that could decarbonize the global cold chain.
Yeah.
So Clean Growth Fund invested in a Series A round in 2022, which enabled SunSwap to take their prototype forward to customer trials. SunSwap then went on to prove that their zero emission, fully integrated battery and solar powered transport solution, that's what it is, can deliver the high performance and reliability.
Yeah.
They had a trial then with Tesco, that's where the link is here, in 2023. And then following that trial, which was successful, Tesco deployed those zero emission, triple temperature capacity capability refrigeration units into its operational fleet last year. So that commitment from Tesco, which was made possible by this private capital incubation of SunSwap's business, has now shown that zero emission cold chain operations are now operationally viable at scale.
Yeah.
So SunSwap, they produce out of Leatherhead in Surrey, but they're now transporting all over the world as far as Australia.
Yeah. And you started off the story with Tesco's need. Is that how you work? Do you identify the need and then try and find the provider, or do you go to the technology provider, the innovator first, or is it a mixture of the two?
So I would say it's a mixture of the two, but it is always about just the best investment opportunities that are on the table when we're deploying capital. And some of these companies, our teams will be watching over a number of years. So I know that they'd seen SunSwap before, and it hadn't been the right time. Then they'd come back when it was the right time. At that point, the Tesco relationship wasn't necessarily there. But it's just being able to identify these opportunities in value chains, in decarbonisation, in areas where we need new technology to be able to decarbonise the global economy.
Yeah. Fantastic. My next question, I should probably caveat this that this is none of this is investment advice. If you go
Yes.
and invest a load of money and lose it, that's your problem. Don't come crying back to us. But what does the investment landscape look like? Because you must see, different technologies come and go. So you mentioned batteries, but and then we talked about whether carbon capture and storage was going to be a big thing or not. But what does the investment look like? Sorry, the landscape look like? What's hot and what's not?
So yeah, as you said, not investment advice. I really do have to caveat that. Very happy though to offer my personal views and opinions on this topic. I might though come at it from a bit of a sort of bigger picture perspective, because I think that there's a really exciting shift happening at the moment in the investment landscape. And it's more specifically on how investors are thinking about net zero investment strategy. And I think that that's being generated by this shift in decision-making power from big corporate asset managers towards asset owners.
Yeah.
And that's because we're getting this sort of consolidation, these pools of capital that have more decision-making power. And I think that's a really positive thing for net zero, because these institutional asset owners are more closely tied to the beneficiaries of capital, and they can take genuine long-term investment decisions. So we're seeing those asset owners now using their voices at shareholder meetings in a way that the biggest corporate asset managers have not traditionally done.
Yeah.
And they're also talking a lot more about real world impact and system change. And I think a really powerful recent example of this is an announcement that the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan made in February this year. So $270 billion asset owner, known for its world-leading approach to net zero investment strategy. They updated their climate strategy, and as part of that, they abandoned their 2030 emissions intensity reduction target. But that's not because OTPP is giving up on the transition. It's actually because they've recognized that decarbonising a portfolio based on backward-looking emissions intensity does not lead to real-world impact or transition-related investment opportunity. So what they've done then is replace the decarbonisation trajectory with a solutions growth trajectory. So specifically a goal to double its investments into the climate transition in private markets over the next 5 years. So I think in terms of where the investment landscape sits, this is a much more positive and impactful approach to net zero investment strategy, channeling capital into innovation and benefiting from this once in a generation opportunity as we grow the global clean economy. And I think it's a sign of things to come. But that to encourage that model in the UK, we need to change the narrative a bit on portfolio climate risk measurement. And to answer your question about sort of specific areas and tech, I think at this early stage that it makes sense to invest in a diversified range of tech and companies. And I think maybe we'll talk about place-based investing, but our fund invests only in UK companies. And so it's really important that we diversify those types of technologies. And so we have a whole range, like I've said, from transport to food and agriculture. And yeah, I could maybe give you an example as well on this sort of place-based idea and food and agriculture.
Yeah, well, go ahead then. You've teed it up.
Sorry, just lining up
Explain
my
what
own
you mean by
question.
place-based first, and then we'll dig into that. Although I do have a question I'd like to come back to, but far away on
Cool.
place-based.
Okay. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
Yes, the place-based thing is so topical at the moment with all the activity that has followed the Chancellor's Mansion House reforms last year. So the UK is really a breeding ground for technological innovation. We've got some of the world's best universities and innovators. We're also Europe's largest venture capital market, and we deliver the most unicorns. So at the moment, we've got 176 private companies valued above $1 billion versus 73 in Germany and 48 in France. But it's a market for innovation that is overwhelmingly benefiting foreign investors because they're the ones who've provided the lion's share of early stage capital. So what the Chancellor is looking to do with these Mansion House proposals is aim to change that, consolidate these local government pension schemes into pools and channel UK capital into local homegrown innovation.
Yeah.
But then there's been some confusion and sort of misalignment around what local means. And so this is where I think we do need to be a bit careful when it comes specifically to venture capital and early stage capital, in that restricting investments to a single council region or a single pool region at this stage is likely to starve deals, amplify risk, and potentially squash regional growth. I think we need to align some of this logic on place-based between what venture funds will do, how pools think, and also how the mayors and councillors in their regions are thinking, so that that innovation isn't starved and we have job creation in the UK that doesn't go abroad.
Yeah.
And so I think that fixing the local definition to the sort of R&D location just doesn't make any sense. And I can give you a really specific example from our portfolio. This is one of my favorite companies in the portfolio, actually. So they're Clean Food Group. So if you think about the food and beverage industry, potentially massive disruption in the transition to net zero, because forest, land, and agriculture, what they call flag emissions, account for nearly a quarter of global emissions. And palm oil is right at the heart of all that. So palm oil is used in confectionery for its stability, versatility, cost effectiveness. And it's been also, though, a leading driver of tropical deforestation and biodiversity loss and human rights abuses. But there's been a lack of cost competitive functional alternatives. And so a lot of these big food and beverage companies have been falling behind on their commitments to their science-based targets because they just don't have that alternative. So Clean Food Group is solving this value chain problem by pioneering these commercial scale production of microbial oils, including a product that mirrors the fatty acid profile of functional palm oil blends, and also delivering on the sustainability and cost and security of supply issues with palm oil.
Yeah.
So Clean Growth Fund invested in March 2024, and Clean Food Group has since then had a load of milestones, including regulatory approval for cosmetics use, which is obviously different to the food use, but also built partnerships with food manufacturers and acquired a 1 million litre fermentation facility in Knowsley in the northwest. And once that's operational, it will make them the largest global manufacturer of yeast-derived oils and fats. Sorry. And what's interesting, though, is to sort of highlight the place-based definitional challenge here, is that Clean Food Group originated in the University of Bath in the southwest. So when we first invested, that would have been the local place of investment. But this new production facility brings up to 150 new jobs in the northwest and sort of really reinforces that region's clean industrial revolution. And that's an outcome that just wouldn't have materialized without a sort of nationwide consideration of VC capital backing a young company that could be flexible and be able to move.
Yeah. And you mentioned, going back to my other question, is you mentioned one of the companies moving from to the solutions basis rather than the carbon intensity of the portfolio. But when companies do that, we often get, or things like that, we often get reports in the press of ESG backlash. And this is the latest in the ESG backlash. But is that an ESG backlash? Are there people literally just going, this was fashionable 10 years ago, it's not today, so we're not doing it anymore? Or is that just newspapers looking for clickbait?
Well, I think there is a backlash. I think it's real. I don't know if maybe this is controversial, but I think it's a necessary backlash. And it's probably a good thing for the industry, really, but also for making net zero a reality.
Yeah.
Because I think ESG, it never really made sense as a single thing.
Yeah.
I think any investor, any active investor at least, would tell you that governance has always been a part of what they do. But I think that combining that with the E and the S just confused too many conflicting goals and targets and beliefs. And I think that what the backlash has done is forced investors to think more carefully about what factors they see as financially material, what their investment beliefs are, and how those beliefs are aligned with their beneficiaries' needs and desires, but also to be much more transparent about how their public statements and goals are genuinely aligned with their activities, or otherwise to have to step away from those public statements and initiatives.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how we measure and communicate the E and the S from an investment risk and opportunity perspective, I think there's still a really long way to go on that. And I think that we have to recognize that we don't have all the answers. We'll have to be flexible. There's no perfect standard of climate risk reporting yet, let alone social risks. But we could seek perfection in reporting forever while ignoring the obvious.
Yeah.
So at the moment, I'm actually working on our impact report. And working on an impact report for the Clean Growth Fund really throws open a lot of these issues, because if you think about what we do have in terms of standardized methods for reporting, they are largely backwards looking emissions. So,
Yeah.
TCFD, climate related financial disclosures, and the ISSB, they have focused on getting standards around scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. But those are all thinking about a company's operational and value chain emissions. They're not thinking about where that company trajectory is going in future. And if you think about that from the perspective of a very small scale-up climate solution company, should we really be concerned about the scope 1 to 3 emissions of a very small scale-up climate solutions company when they have huge carbon abatement potential?
Yeah.
So really the metric that's more interesting is, what is that abatement potential, and how do we sort of represent and measure that? So it's a really important part of our investment process, which is when we first invest in a company and it goes to investment committee, the investment team develops with the company a carbon case,
Yeah.
which looks at its abatement potential over time. And we will also have that assessed by an external expert in the field, and that will, often an academic. It will depend on who that is, because they'll be in different sectors, for example. And that will also look at, once they reach scale, can they generate those 100,000 tons of emissions abatement that we're looking for? And then we'll go back to that carbon case every year. And that's what I'm doing at the moment, is going back to the companies and looking at the carbon case, looking at their sales projections, seeing how they're doing, but also asking them to report on progress on diversity and inclusion metrics, if they're putting certain policies in place. These are really small startup companies. And also thinking about how to represent the real meaningful and substantial co-benefits to society from our portfolio.
Yeah.
Because we're investing on a carbon case, but we're actually growing new companies and industries and bringing jobs to regions around the country as well.
Yeah. Yeah. That very interesting, but it's sort of a abatement potential is kind of a can of worms, isn't it? Because you've got I did my master's in life cycle assessment, and the conclusion of my thesis was that basically the assumptions that you put in my case, it was a ship I was using as the case study for the model that I developed. But the assumptions over how long that ship will be in operation, where it will travel, how much time it will spend traveling to and fro, were all dominated the the sensitivity analysis when I looked at what variables were giving me the answer, and there was only a few things that you could really pin down, like the fuel consumption of the engines. Although even that would be dependent on conditions and where you sail, etc. So all of those assumptions, I realized, were me sort of dreaming up the lifestyle of the ship. But even the ships get scrapped when their scrap value is more than their net present value for in operation, and that depends on a huge number of factors, from the price of scrap steel to global trade. And so, is it not very easy to massage abatement potential figures to give you the answer you want? Is that not the big challenge?
It really is. I think that's a really fair challenge as well, and it's something that I would be very concerned about. And particularly, actually, that's where I've come at this from, is if you think about the scope 3 metric, right, which is looking at value chain emissions, it's not telling the full picture. So a good example is like a climate solutions company might be, say, an heat pump company, sorry.
Yeah.
So heat pump companies, or like LED light companies, for example, they tend to have really high scope 3 emissions. So if you use that as the judge of your sort of climate investment risk associated with that company,
Hmm.
You often would think that like a heat pump company or a climate and another sort of climate solutions company, they often tend to have bigger scope 3 emissions than an oil and gas company.
Yeah.
So that in terms of investment risk doesn't make any sense when it comes
Yeah.
to the transition. So I do, and what you're talking about is, and I've looked into this before, this the idea of sort of a scope 4 metric and an offsetting metric.
Mhm.
That is really problematic because there are so many challenges around, what your starting point is, what your base case is, for example. I do also think that the picture's not complete, and scope 3 is not perfect either.
Yeah.
That scope 3 is really problematic. There are 15 different categories of scope 3 all being put into one figure, and as a number that really often doesn't make much sense. So I think what we do have to sort of appreciate is that all of this is complex. We have to stop trying to oversimplify things into single figures like this. And yeah, that we don't have all the answers, but also I think we just have to be really transparent about what it is that we are showing when we're
Yeah.
looking at these new metrics.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were doing your own fund report. We haven't really talked, I suppose, about your day job. What does the head of investor relations and sustainability do?
Yeah, so well, I'm new actually. I've only been at the Clean Growth Fund for 3 months,
Yeah.
just over 3 months now. But I joined in February this year. And so my role is I've come on board to help our founder Beverly raise the next fund, to work with our LPs. That's what my sort of role as head of investor relations means. On the sustainability side, although it can sound like two jobs, the two just naturally really go together at somewhere like the Clean Growth Fund because everything that we do is related to sustainability. So when I'm talking to our LPs, I need to be able to have the right sort of data and reporting to communicate with them. So yeah, part of my day job and a big part of my day job at the moment is working on our impact report, where I'll go out to all of the portfolio companies and ask them to report on the data. And I'm writing white papers and contributing to sort of industry discussion around that as well.
So when the sustainability bit, is that about the portfolio as
Oh,
opposed to
and the fund. Yeah, so no,
company,
that's a good
or is
point.
it internal as well?
Yeah, no, we're also as an organization. I mean, as you can imagine, a team of people who are investing in climate tech are all quite sort of climate conscious, but we are also we report and record all of our emissions as far as we can, scope 1 to 3. What is challenging though is our portfolio is reporting our portfolio financed emissions.
Yeah.
And that's where this kind of forward-looking abatement metric is. It's an important thing for us to be able to sort of think and report on. But
Yeah.
also, as you say, appreciate it's not, there's no kind of standard around that at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I could dig into that for a while. I once saw a study, now this is a long time ago, of a sort of meta study of comparative life cycle assessments. And they found that all of them favored the product of whoever was sponsoring the study.
Mhm.
So I've always been a little bit conscious, I'd say, rather than skeptical, but conscious of the fact that yeah, when you are projecting forward, it's very hard. And I suppose that's
Yeah.
when you're looking at the portfolio, then, this probably doesn't apply to your portfolio, but for a more general fund who has some clean tech and some not, that if they
Mm.
focused on the solutions, then but they were still investing in fossil fuel technology or exploration every year, they could that's a scope for greenwash as well. So
Mm.
I suspect they still should be reporting on the carbon intensity of the portfolio as well as the abatement potential.
Yeah, I think that is the real challenge. And going back to that, what I mentioned about the Ontario pension plan, and what they have done is that's what this is really. They've recognized that by just looking at portfolio emissions intensity, which by definition is kind of scope 1 to 3 as far as you can get it, because scope 3 data is not, well, far from perfect.
Yeah.
That just looking at that and then reducing that in line with a sort of EU-defined Paris-aligned benchmark, 7% every year, that is not leading to that investment in the solutions. And largely that is because the solutions can have high emissions,
Yeah.
backward looking, but there's no way of seeing what their forward looking potential is.
Yeah.
So what they've done then is rather than recognizing that is they've just abandoned that emissions intensity reduction target because it's just kind of shifting around sort of portfolio emissions. And they've said what we're going to do instead is invest actively in private markets, in climate solutions, and grow that trajectory. So I think that's the kind of I do, like I said, I think that's a sign of things to come.
Yeah. And certainly it's said that when you look at the energy market, all the money seems to be going into clean technology. Despite all this talk of backlashes and what Trump's trying to do and everything, even in the US, far more investment seems to be going into solar, wind, and batteries than coal or gas. But I don't know if you touch on energy per se or whether it's other technologies.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think what this sort of latest issue has shown us is that, you know, well, I think the sort of the narrative around a lot of this has changed more now to kind of energy security, and that is something that is the way that the transition is kind of being described a lot more now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know George Monbiot argued the other day that Donald Trump has probably done more for the low carbon transition than any other person, inadvertently, of course, but by giving us all an energy security, a fossil fuel energy security crisis in the Middle
Mm.
East. And but again, that must be a big challenge for your sector is that the geopolitical plates can shift so quickly, and who knows what technology will suddenly become applicable in a certain circumstance when things can change so rapidly from week to week, and yet you're making long-term investments to get long-term returns.
Yeah.
So that I don't know where you start to manage risks like that.
Well, I think that then comes down to diversification in our portfolio.
Yeah,
And this is the whole idea, right? We're investing in these startup technologies that are proven, and we can see have huge potential. But it's then trying to help them through that early stage funding so that they can commercialize. But yeah, diversification we think is essential. So the first fund has 19 companies.
yeah.
The second fund, which we're targeting 150 million, will have around 25 companies from all different sectors and technologies.
We've covered a lot of ground. I was just wondering if there was if you could sum up for us as sort of what are the big sort of sustainability investment lessons you've learned, not just in your new current role, but across your career.
I always find these so hard. So I think the first one, and I always say this, it's so basic, but I think no matter how kind of smart, important, or busy you are, that kindness and good humor and a smile cost you absolutely nothing. And so, like, there's this Maya Angelou quote that just stays with me all the time, which is that people will forget exactly what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And that just
Yeah,
really sticks with me. And I think it's really important for the way that we communicate about the transition and a lot of these topics, which are, I think eco anxiety is a real thing.
yeah,
So the way that we communicate it is really important. Um, Another thing I'd say that I've learned over my career is that yes, life is definitely too short, and losing my mum to cancer when she was only 69 taught me that it's too short to do something that makes you unhappy. But also, I think there's so much time in your career, and you won't necessarily find the right path straight away. So I think I felt a pressure when I graduated at 21 to, get on with my career. But then going back to university when I was 40, it was just the best thing I did. And it changed everything for me. So studying again, when you already have that life experience and professional experience, it's thoroughly rewarding, but it also can give you that agency to actually make a difference. I think finally, it's probably to be brave. I think I have followed my instincts quite a bit. And when I met Beverly, so the founder of Clean Growth Fund, just over a year ago, and I heard about what she was doing, I just knew this was the right place for me and where I could go next and really bring all of that experience that I've had so far into sort of genuine impact. Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
for what it's worth, that's my career advice.
No, that's a very similar, a lot of resonance with what I went through because I started up following quite a dull civil service career, and then took a career break, decided I wanted to do something that excited me, went back to university, got that master's I was talking about,
Yeah.
and my career has gone on from there. And that was quite early on, but yes, I think that's a really good point. Is if you people listening suddenly want to divert and follow your dreams, it's never too late to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Lauren, thanks so much for joining us. I think you gave us a great insight, and that just leaves me to wish you all the best for the new fund, the new fundraising that you're doing at the minute, and let's hope that we see many of those technologies come to fruition.
Great. Thanks very much, Gareth.